Banter is back again to enrich your lives with assistive technology news.
Damn, see, you've been busy during the time off. You've been working on jingles, clearly.
This is the AT Banter Podcast, a balanced and entertaining look at assistive technology, accessibility, and its importance in people's lives. Join Rob Minot, Ryan Fleury, and Steve Barclay as they banter with people around the world about anything and everything regarding assistive technology and the disability community. Now, on with the show.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of AT Banter. Hey, my name is Rob Minot, and joining me today, the songster, Mr. Ryan Fleury.
Howdy.
No Steve Barclay again today, but we promise he's not dead. He's around. He'll be back. He'll be back one day.
He might even be back next week.
He's doing a lot of catch up. He's very busy right now.
Yes, he has been. It's a busy summer for him.
Yep. How was your week off?
It was pretty laid back. You know, it was a staycation, so we didn't go anywhere. But we had, brunch with family and brunch with friends. And
that's nice.
We actually made it out to the record store to pick up a couple more pieces of vinyl.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were going to do that. Good. So that was successful?
Yeah, well, not as successful as I wanted it to be, but I got 2 out of the 5 I think I was looking for. So,
well, listen, who can
can't
afford
complain.
records these days? What are they? $40 each?
No, it depends on the record, but $12, $14, $20.
Okay, well that's not bad. I mean,
yeah, they're not new.
$10 in a day.
Yeah, they're not new. If I was to buy Fleetwood Mac Rumors on Amazon, it's like $35 or something.
Oh,
right?
well, hold on. What do you mean they're not new? You mean this is like a used record store and they're $12 and $14?
Yep.
Okay, that's crazy. I used to go to used record stores and buy records for 50 cents.
Yeah, that was in the 80s, Rob.
Whatever. What? No, it wasn't. No, absolutely. Well, wait. No. All right. Well, whatever.
Napster changed everything.
Dang.
Remember Napster?
Yeah, no, Napster. What? Yeah, of course I
Remember
remember
Napster?
Jeez, I miss Napster to this day. I tell you. Thanks a lot, Metallica.
That's right.
Jerks. Hey, what the hell are we doing today?
Well, today we got an email from a previous podcast guest from Envision AI asking if you could share with our audience some exciting promotional news that they are having. So we are speaking with Karthik Kannan from Envision AI.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And what else are we doing?
Today we are also talking about news. News.
Yes, that's right. You're just in music mode today. Yeah, that's right. Well, we haven't really talked much news in the past few weeks, and we've been off, and so we got a little bit of collection of stuff to talk about. So, we thought that maybe the time was high to
do some news. That wasn't 15 seconds worth. They can't sue me.
That's true. That's true.
Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, why don't shut up? You can just sing for 40 minutes, and I can go have lunch. I'm down.
No, nobody wants to hear me sing.
Well, let's talk some news. What? No news channels? No new news channels? You gotta start working on that.
All right.
Let's start things off by talking about your personal favorite topic to talk about.
Pizza?
And no, close though. But we have a pizza story later. No, ride sharing / taxis.
Yes, good old ride sharing.
Now, I've kind of bundled a couple different news stories together. One more local, and one from the States. But both, I think, reflect something that has needed to be addressed for a long time. It's been a problem for a long time. And that is both, and this is, again, there are two different stories about two different services, one a taxi service and one ride sharing, both pretty much the same thing. So we'll start at the national story, which is a San Francisco woman with a disability says that Lyft drivers have repeatedly canceled her rides when they pull up and see her service dog. So this woman has a service dog named Astra, and she explained that during a recent visit to San Francisco to attend a admitted students reception, a Lyft driver canceled on her when the driver pulled up and saw her service dog, who was wearing a dog vest that said service dog and medical alert. She, of course, reported the incident to Lyft's trust and safety team. They responded saying all the right things, offered her a $5 credit.
Have a nice day.
Well, yeah, big deal, right? But she'd also said that she had two more similar experiences.
It's not just Lyft or Uber, it's the taxi
Uber,
companies.
again, we could pull up stories from about
Absolutely.
Uber, that very similar stories, as well as taxis.
Exactly. And like you said, it's nothing new. This has been happening for years. And, what I don't understand is, some taxi drivers will say, it's something, I think something to do with their religion, or they're allergic to dogs. And, yes, there are people that are allergic to dogs, but you know what? Then I don't think, well, yeah, I'll go out and say it. Send all hate mail to cowbell@atbanter.com. But if you're allergic to dogs, then I don't think you should be in a employment situation or service that caters to the public.
I would agree. I'd agree 100%. I don't think that's any cause for hate mail. I mean, I think that just makes sense. I mean, that's, if you have to realize that when you're in a public service like this, you can't just refuse people. I mean, you're gonna have to accept the fact that on occasion you may have to take a dog.
Can you imagine?
If you're not okay with that, then don't be a Lyft driver. Don't be a taxi driver. It's as simple as that.
Can you imagine if you're standing at a bus stop and the bus driver sees you with a guide dog, service dog, therapy dog, whatever, and just drives right past you?
That's right. Yeah. So
there would be a huge human outcry.
Yeah.
And the taxi drivers, all transportation should have to obey or follow the same laws that relate to transportation and service animals, whether it's ride sharing, whether it's taxis, transit, whatever. These guys need to be held accountable.
Yeah, and to Lyft's credit, we should go on to say that they responded to the incident, and they responded with a statement saying what the rider described is unacceptable. Community safety and inclusivity are core to our mission, and we have a strict service animal policy that requires all drivers to accommodate riders traveling with service animals. Failure to abide by that policy can result in being removed from the Lyft community.
I think what I need to do is I need to see if I can get somebody from Uber or Lyft or a ride sharing. We're supposed to be getting ride sharing actually here in the Lower Mainland next month. So it'd be actually interesting if I could get somebody on from Uber or Lyft to talk about, what their policies are regarding people with disabilities and service animals.
Yeah, the woman who was refused service, her response to all this was, you know, she acknowledged that Lyft is following the letter of the law, but in her opinion, where they're falling down is that they're not training the drivers of the policy, and they're not really enforcing the policy. So, for example, this driver that did this, you know, is he going to be removed from the Lyft community? Will he lose his status because of this? We don't know. Like that part of it.
And that's just it. You know, the
until the drivers really understand that this is a policy, and that if they don't adhere to it, they're going to essentially get fired. They're not going to take notice of it. You know, they may just drive off. You know, and especially if they don't even know the policy is there. You know, that's the part of the X factor of this is Lyft may have this policy, but do they really enforce it, or do they, let their drivers know that it's in place? Because a policy is no good if nobody knows that it's there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, enforcement it always comes back to enforcement. We have vehicles that speed up and down our street every night, and you hear about cars that were speeding and in accidents, and people are always complaining about how fast people are going, and ticketing isn't working. And what I've always thought, and I still say today, is that driving's a privilege, it's not a right. If you're caught speeding, impound the car for 60 days or impound it and crush it. I'm sorry, you've lost your privileges. Seriously, driving is not a right. And if you want people to change, society to change their attitudes, then you've got to get enforcement. You got to be tough.
Listen, yeah.
You can't just, here's a $200 ticket and the guy's back in his car the next day doing the same thing again. If you want to change attitudes, you've got to get tough. Let's see if I can get somebody on, talk about their policies, and it'd be good to educate people.
Again, I think that really the only response that you would just get is that they would point to the policy, which, again, they're doing all the right things on paper. The policies are there, but again, it's really just enforcement. And unless they're actually penalizing drivers for doing this, nothing's going to come of it.
I'd still like to actually talk to somebody from a ride-sharing company to find out how the system works. So you have an app on your phone, you request the ride, but that ride shows up, sees you have a dog or whatever the situation is, and leaves. Does the ride-sharing company actually get a signal that driver has actually left and not picked up the person, or does that person actually have to phone in and say, I think the car pulled up and left, or the car did pull up, saw my dog and left? How does that whole system work?
Right.
Because I don't know. I've got the Uber app on my phone, and I'm looking forward to actually trying it when we get them here. But I'd just like to know how the process works.
So now on a related story, here in the Lower Mainland, there was a story in the local paper about somebody in a wheelchair who got refused several times by taxi drivers. 2 weeks ago, Gabriel Peters spent a rare day out in Vancouver with friends. They took in a cultural festival in the afternoon, then headed for dinner at a restaurant Peters had always wanted to try. Peters uses a wheelchair. It's always a challenge to find a taxi that will take her, but she says the night of July 20th was the worst it's ever been. She and her friends say she was refused by multiple drivers with accessible vehicles who dropped off passengers while she was waiting in front of the restaurant.
You know what they need to do?
What?
These ride-sharing companies and the taxi companies need to actually start, when they get a complaint from a customer saying the driver pulled up and then left, those drivers should actually be flagged in the system somehow, so that, if you're requesting a taxi, you shouldn't have to necessarily say, I'm blind and I have a service dog, or I'm in a wheelchair. I guess in a wheelchair you need an accessible vehicle so that you can load you up. But they need to start flagging these drivers so we can actually see, okay, well, this driver isn't going to pick me up, so Uber will send somebody else.
Yeah, that could be certainly part of the solution. Well, that's interesting that you say that, because the article goes on to say that the Vancouver Taxi Association spokesperson Carolyn Bauer told CBC she'd like to speak with Peters about her experience and find a way to make things right. That includes holding the drivers who passed her by accountable.
Yep.
Bauer says that all taxi companies have penalties for discriminating against disabled passengers.
I didn't know that.
The BC Transportation Ministry notes its strengthened penalties for businesses and drivers that fail to follow the Taxi Bill of Rights, which prohibit discriminating against people with disabilities. Fines of up to $50,000 can now be issued for anyone who does not comply, and licenses can be suspended or canceled. Hey, listen, it's a big deal for a taxi company. If they get their license suspended, they're hosed.
Yeah, for 30 days or 10 days or whatever the suspension period is. It's no different than the Accessible Canada Act. We can levy fines up to, $100,000. Whoop, that's never going to happen. Fines of $50,000. When's the last time a taxi company fined one of their drivers that? I don't know, but I'm speculating it's never happened.
Well, I'm assuming that I think the $50,000 would be towards a taxi company. I don't think it would be against the individual driver. Although who knows? I could be wrong about that. But again, that's the part that we don't know. We don't know what the companies themselves are doing in terms of enforcing these policies. The policies are on record and they say all the right things. But really, the fact that these problems have been around for years. I mean, how often did we hear stories about taxi drivers refusing to take service dogs?
Yeah.
I mean, this is not something that's new. And I think the pushback really needs to be hard so that drivers know that, they are going to, get in real trouble if they do this because, for somebody who's in a chair or has a service dog or, they're relying on these services in order to get around. And when they just get refused offhand, when it takes them 2 hours to actually get a cab, I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of everybody, I mean, they're the people that actually need these services the most.
Yeah. Yeah, we have another story where, we talk about SkyTrain elevators not working and people that are in wheelchairs, can't get to where they need to go in a timely fashion. And so those of us with disabilities do rely on these services, I think, much more than, the able-bodied community who's able to just either hop in a car, flag a taxi, and go where they want.
Sure. And, we can talk about that. I mean, the article that you're talking about is again, it's from CBC and it's it's just a piece about what actually happens to people in chairs or people who are relying on the elevators at the SkyTrains in order to get to the platforms. When those elevators break down, what exactly happens? Like how does that affect them? And it can easily double their transit time because they'll have to go to a different station, use the elevator there and then backtrack, or sometimes they need to take an extra bus. There's it's a real inconvenience.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the issue that people are having with TransLink is that these aren't just a case where the elevator breaks down in the middle of the day. These are cases where this is routinely scheduled maintenance. And they say that, every elevator needs to be inspected once a month. These inspections can take 3 or 4 hours or even a day. And, once a year, they have to do a yearly inspection that's even more in depth and that can take up to 2 days. So when you're taking an elevator out of service at a station for 2 days, for example, once a year, that can really have an impact on the usability of the system for, a group of people. And I guess part of the problem that we're trying to address here is that there's no plan B in place for the users. It's just, hey, this elevator is out of service this week.
Yeah, and I think
2 days, and they're not offering, alternatives for the users. It's just they got to come up with their own plan. The article goes on to say that TransLink's policy states that it must have an attendant present when the only critical elevator to access the platform is out for maintenance or repairs. And the company also tries to schedule maintenance during non-peak hours.
Right.
But there's an industry shortage of qualified elevator technicians. So in other words, they would love to do it for non-peak hours, meaning like probably like after hours.
So basically we need more elevator technicians.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, and I feel like the frustrating part of this is that for years and years and years, and who knows, maybe this is changing. I would like to think so. But, for years and years and years, I think the attitude has been like, well, look, this only impacts a small fraction of people. This is just something we got to do, so we're doing it. And there wasn't really a lot of attention being paid to the impact that it had on that small population. Pushback like this and having these issues sort of being brought into the daylight, I think is extremely important.
Well, and I think as passengers, we need to know what our rights are.
Listen, mobility is an important thing, and especially like, we're going on about how, more and more businesses are being inclusive in their hiring practices, and more people are being employed that have things like physical disabilities. So, when there's when more and more people are entering the workforce, that means more and more people have to access things like public transportation. So it's more important than ever for to have this accessibility in public spaces being an extremely important issue.
And this is where we come back around to our previous discussions on, infrastructure and bolt-on accessibility. The infrastructure, in most major cities was built 30, 40, 50 years ago. And, accessibility is being bolt-on now. But any new, whether it's public spaces, transit locations, whatever, hopefully that accessibility is in the design stage, and we won't have these issues going forward.
Yeah. Knock on wood. In a perfect world.
That's right.
Okay, well, how about we talk about that pizza now?
Yeah, let's talk about Domino's.
So this is an article out of this is from CNBC. It talks about somebody who is now suing Domino's because their website is not accessible.
Yeah, I believe this customer had tried to use the app as well as the website online to place an order and found that the sites and the app, weren't fully accessible, and decided to, I guess, file a complaint with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And Domino's is saying that the ADA does not cover website accessibility. And I understand some lower courts have said, well, yes, it does. But Domino's has decided, instead of working with the customer and other agencies to make their site accessible, they're going to spend millions of dollars, and they're approaching the Supreme Court. Yeah. So this could really set a really bad precedent for companies if Domino's wins this case, because that's going to mean all the lawsuits that have gone through in the past against companies who have made their sites inaccessible aren't going to have to worry about accessibility anymore.
Yeah. So part of the issue is that what Domino's is saying that the lawsuit itself is a nuisance, which, okay, too bad. But they argue that the federal government has not yet put out rules that govern how to make web platforms ADA compliant. So now this is an issue that I remember, when we had David Lepofsky on discussing the ACA back when they were sort of like trying to improve the text of the ACA. He would talk about this idea of standards, and that when you put an act into being, if you don't have standards, it's almost useless. You have to be able to point to things specific things that companies must do in order for those companies to do them. You can't just say, your website needs to be accessible. Well, because for a company that doesn't mean anything to them. They don't if they don't know anything about accessibility,
right?
They don't know how to bring their website into compliance,
right?
And that's Domino's argument. They're saying that the ADA itself doesn't say anything about how to make their website accessible.
But you know what? I think that's
how can they be held accountable for they don't even know how to comply?
Well, and that's maybe the hazy gray area that they might succeed on with this case. But again, for many years, there have been guidelines for creating web accessibility. There's been the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium. There are guidelines on building accessible sites and accessible apps. And, sure, maybe Domino's didn't think about accessibility. Maybe they didn't take the time to maybe work with this customer and do a little bit of digging on, how can we make our site and app accessible? We don't really know the full backstory between this client and Domino's, but
well, this suit has been in existence for 3 years.
This Domino's lawsuit?
Brand new. Yeah. He's been suing them for 3 years now.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. Well, listen, these things take a while to get moving. Right?
So think of the money that Domino's has spent pursuing this to get to the Supreme Court, which it may or may not make. It's still, I think, a couple months away, they say. When they could have maybe just reached out to the ADA, the NFB, the ACB, whoever, and said, look, you guys, here's a chunk of money. Can you help make our website accessible? And they would have saved a ton of money. And the kicker to all this that I just, F you Domino's, is this week, Domino's is having a half sale price on a bunch of pizzas. It's like, I can't use your app. I can't use your website. So F you, Domino's. I'm not going to support you. If this is how you're going to treat your patrons, I'm sorry. But, all it takes is a quick Google search on website accessibility, and you're going to find all sorts of stuff. This didn't have to go to court. Yeah.
Well, listen, I'm by no means taking Domino's side on this. But
shitty pizza anyway.
I do think that they do have a point in terms of
maybe
the act itself.
Maybe
if it's not clear with what the standards are, then that's a problem.
Well, that's just it. If it just says your site has to be accessible, that's not enough.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, you have to be really clear with these acts. And, we're looking down the barrel of having a bunch of similar problems, I feel like, with the new ACA Act for us.
Yep.
Which for everybody who listens down in the States, it's basically our version of the ADA.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, if Domino's is successful in winning this case, it's going to set a precedent for every other company out there to not have to worry about accessibility, and it could set us back decades.
But I think the real irony behind that is that there are already a lot of companies out there that aren't taking web accessibility seriously.
Well, for example,
because there's still a lot of sites that seem to be not accessible. I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know this user's what he's using as a screen reader. I don't know. Just what the extent of the lack of accessibility is for Domino's. Mm-hmm. If their site is, maybe it uses a lot of pop-ups and a lot of graphical menus and stuff that makes that ordering process impossible, even with a screen reader. But I mean, it seems insane to me that a company that relies on the general public being able to order food online, and the fact that they can do it online and through an app is incredibly useful. Mm-hmm. It seems crazy to me that they would try to put the brakes on that. I mean, you'd think that it's like, wow, look, if we make our app or our website super accessible, that way, all these people who are using screen readers can order pizzas just as easily as anybody else. That's only going to help improve their bottom line, not take away from it. So, I'm kind of shocked from a business perspective to see Domino's doing this.
Well, and that's just one example.
A little bizarre, but I mean, this article goes on to say that it's not just Domino's, and there are other business groups that are absolutely supporting Domino's in the fight, and including the Restaurant Law Center and the National Retail Federation. They're all on Domino's side on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And like my wife and I use Skip the Dishes, and there's a bunch of buttons on there that are unlabeled. So I can't use the app independently using VoiceOver on my iPhone, so I have to get my wife to use her phone because she has sight and she can tap the buttons. But you made a good point earlier. There's a website I use for sharing my music, and their website is pretty clunky and fairly inaccessible for the most part. It's usable, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And I've reached out to them multiple times and pointed them to resources, links on how, we may be able to work together and make their site more accessible so that those of us who are blind or visually impaired could get the most out of, their services and offerings. And I've heard nothing back. So, just to complain to a company isn't enough. You need to go that extra mile, give them some resources, show them that you're interested, show them that there's a business case for making their site more accessible and opening it up to more people.
Well, listen, but let me push back against you on that, because you went and did that. You went that extra mile and gave them that information. You haven't heard anything back. And so it could very well be that, for a lot of people, litigation is the route that you have to take with these guys, because that's how you get their attention.
Right.
But I mean, more and more we're in this digital age where apps and websites and stuff are just integral to being a consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And for somebody who say is say visually impaired, who wants to order a pizza, well, doing it online and doing it through an app maybe is the best option for them. And the fact that they're being locked out of that experience in 2019 and every single website on the internet is not accessible. I mean, that's a little bit shocking. When you consider how long web accessibility has been supposedly so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and same with apps. One of the, I'll go back to skip the dishes for a second. One of the great things I love about it is I can see a list of restaurants I'd never would have even found before using the app. On Monday, this past week, I ordered a pizza from a company I'd never used before, and it was really good pizza, and the prices were better than, other competitors in town. So it's a great way of discovering new foods, new restaurants as well. And if they make it more accessible, then hey, I'll spread the word and tell people, hey, use this app. It's fully accessible. All these restaurants are here. Try something new.
The article does mention the fact that in terms of web accessibility and usability, there's a ton of space for companies to innovate and to really take the reins and charge forward with this and open up their business to a whole new demographic that would flood into their service or their company or their retail space, their online retail space. I mean, you have this whole new demographic that's hungry for this stuff. And from a business point of view, it doesn't make sense to lock out people, for no other reason than, I don't know, it's going to cost you a few bucks initially to actually innovate or to make sure that your app or your website is fully accessible.
Yeah, and we as I'll just use the blind population for example. We're pretty patient people. We don't expect a company like Domino's. I don't anyway. I shouldn't speak for everybody. A company like Domino's to be fully accessible overnight. But if I see them making improvements, like, oh look, all of a sudden they've got increased magnification or increased font size on their website or change colors. If I see they're making some advances, then great, and give them the credit that's due. Because if we don't, there's no reason for them to continue. We need to support the companies that are building accessibility into their sites and products.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. Maybe some people would just look at this issue and go, "Well, why didn't the dude just call the number then? Like, if you can't access the website, just call the number and order it through voice." But
maybe he's nonverbal.
Yeah, sure. But not only that, sure, you could be nonverbal or whatever. Or you could have social anxiety. Maybe you don't like making phone calls. But the point is that any given website or service should be accessible by anyone, regardless of what their limitations are. And that's more the point. And it's the mindset that needs to be changed as opposed to that. That's what we're fighting for. That's what this lawsuit is about. It's not about the fact that this dude couldn't get a Hawaiian pizza on a Friday night.
Yeah.
I'm sure he did. He probably just got pissed off, with trying to fight with the website and did just phone it in So he probably got his pizza in the long run anyways. But the point of the matter is it's this mindset that needs to change. And in a digital space, the digital space needs to be treated just like the physical space fight that we're also having over accessibility. Things need to be accessible from the get-go. They need to be built accessible. And it's not an expensive process when you build accessibility in from the ground up, as opposed to trying to tack it on later. And I understand that in the digital space, companies are always trying to innovate in general. Problem is that a lot of times when they do innovate, when they make these apps and they make them flashy, or they make them have all these bells and whistles that for somebody who can see might be great, but it locks people out who are, say, using screen readers.
Yeah, and perfect example of that is the Amazon website. You go to amazon.ca, that I use all the time, and it's quite accessible. I have no problems with it at all. But right at the top, there's a link that says, if you're using a screen reader, click here for a screen reader friendly version of the site.
Right.
Like, just build it accessible. Like, we shouldn't have an alternative site.
Yeah, but at least that's a better...
It is, yeah.
At least that's a better solution.
Yes, absolutely.
Say for Amazon, I'm sure that the downside of doing it that way is that, well, now they have two sites that they have to maintain,
yeah,
and that they have to pay attention to. So,
yep, yeah. So we're definitely, I think,
that hard.
No, and I think we're definitely going to try to stay on top of this story and see where it goes, because it has the potential for some big ramifications.
Well, like you said, that the suit itself is going to the Supreme Court, which will decide whether or not they're going to hear the case
right
in the fall. So it shouldn't be too long, and we will see some movement on this and see where this lands.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I really am. I think that part of my fear is that I don't think it's necessarily going to solve the problem if this guy just gets a big settlement from Domino's, if they just have to pay him a bunch of money. And I mean, yes, it'll maybe put the fear of God into some of these other companies that are maybe just sort of sitting and waiting to see what happens. It's like, do we need to make our website accessible? And let's see how this Domino thing goes. But what I think really needs to happen, if we really want to fix this, is that they need to go back to the ADA and go, okay, you know what? We need to actually define some standards. We need to actually explain to companies, this is what we mean by making your website accessible. And here's the checklist of things that need to happen. Help them out.
Well, and I wonder,
just put in the act that, you just have to make it accessible, and that could really mean a variety of different things. And we're not giving you any guidelines to go by. We already know that doesn't work. So, I mean, that's what I would really like to see as a result of this. I think that's the way that you solve the problem. It's not just this guy versus Domino's. You have to change the mindset, and we have to be wanting to really implement change. And in order to do that, I mean, everybody needs to work together, and it doesn't need to be, people with disabilities versus, retailers online. We can all work together to make it better, and, everybody wins. Blind people get their pizzas, Domino's gets the money for their crappy pizzas, and, everybody's happy. Sorry, Domino's, I'm not a big fan. More of a Boston pizza guy.
Oh, yuck.
You don't like Boston pizza either?
No, I don't like their crust.
Really?
It's very bland and plain. I like some substance to my pizza.
And yet another story about accessibility that we might as well talk about while we're talking about this. It seems to be the sort of the topic of the episode. But another article from CBC about a woman who is complaining about the fact that self-checkouts that we're seeing in more and more grocery stores and well, actually we're seeing it everywhere.
Automation.
Grocery stores.
Yeah.
And this is a good point, and something that, even I didn't really think about too much, is that those self-checkouts aren't really very accessible.
No, you know, if you're visually impaired or, partially sighted or even blind for that matter, if you're
They're
trying
not
to,
an option for you.
well, yeah, they're not. And, you don't know where the barcode is, and you can sure spin your can on the screen and it'll detect it, but you're not gonna be able to see the LCD screen and see what the price is and, all that sort of stuff. So, why don't you read a little bit of the story and give us some more information?
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, this goes back to innovation, and it goes back to when companies innovate. Accessibility is not necessarily at all considered. I remember when self checkouts first showed up. There was no. It's not like Safeway went. Okay, well, we've developed these really cool self checkout machines, but I don't know. Can blind people use them? No, they didn't even think of that. They were just like, no, cool. Here, we've developed a self checkout machine, so now we don't have to have as many cashiers. We can help get more people through a day than with a lower cost to us. When more and more emphasis are put on these systems, again, accessibility, you have to take that into account. Now, what I will say about this is that, like I shop at Safeway all the time, and I do know that with Safeway, they always have one staff member that sort of is monitoring
Right.
all the checkout machines. So I mean, if that's the case, if you're say visually impaired and you're trying to, you want to go to the self checkout and put through 5-10 items or something, there's a good chance that all you would really need to do is once you get there is to just flag the person down, and they would, I'm sure, be happy to come over and help you with that. But again, it's the mindset that I think that is more important. And I think that when retail and public spaces are putting things into effect, when they're innovating, I just feel like they need to consider accessibility way more than I think they are.
I shared a story yesterday on Tim Hortons. And
which I have to, I'll just interrupt you there. I noticed that there are self checkouts showing up at Tim Hortons now.
Well, and McDonald's has them.
Yep.
So if you have a chance, read the story I shared on Facebook on Tim Hortons, because it talks about automation and how, there are some restaurants in the States that can chop onions and make burgers and flip burgers, all without the use of people. We have all these automated devices coming into our public spaces that have screens on them and no accessibility thought put into them at all.
Right.
So, you're right. It is all about mentality, and it has to start at the design phase. It can't be an afterthought. Yeah.
And, and again, I mean, the downside of that is that going to slow down innovation? Probably. I mean, I understand that this stuff, it's complicated and that's going to mire things down, but
depending
on at the end of the day, people with disabilities have to be considered. I mean, that's why we're having all these fights, and that's why we've got the ACA and the ADA and all this stuff. And when there's no enforcement in terms of really making companies really factor that accessibility in, it's not gonna start to happen.
Yeah, and depending on the product, there I believe are banks and financial institutions that actually have talking ATMs for people who are blind or visually impaired. So right. How hard would it be for Tim Hortons, let's say, or McDonald's or Safeway, whoever that has one of these, self-checkout kiosks that you could just, maybe walk up to, and sure, maybe you have to plug in a set of headphones to trigger the text-to-speech, but if you knew that, you'd just have a pair of earbuds with you and, be able to do something independently and feel inclusive.
Yep.
This technology has been around a long time, but again, I think it's these companies that just aren't thinking about accessibility.
Yeah, and and again, I have to say that my experience with some of these self-check, I mean, the point is none of these problems that you could point to in accessibility wise are impossible to solve. I know for a fact that, Safeway, when I use the self-checkout, when I scan an item, it voices what the item is and how much it is.
Right.
Above and beyond that, I mean, do you need much more than that in terms of to make them accessible? I mean, maybe, but I mean, that's certainly a good start. So, there by no means are I think that are we trying to set up unrealistic expectations of innovation in any of these digital spaces. It's all within the realm of possibility. It takes that extra work. And, to wrap this conversation back around to legislation and the different acts, is that there needs to be enforcement in place and there needs to be standards in place. So that is very clear to a company what the expectations are in terms of accessibility and how to make their system comply with those standards. And in order to do that, we need a better system than what we've got.
Well, time will tell what happens here in Canada anyway. ADA's been around 30 years, and we know how that's turned out.
That's why I was shocked earlier about reading that article about specifically web accessibility standards and the ADA. The fact that the ADA has been around since the 1990s, and there aren't any standards in terms of web accessibility for companies to follow, and that's shocking.
Yeah, it's something I don't know enough about, so it may be worth digging into a little bit, but I would be really surprised that during the whole .com era, this was not a thought.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that it mentions web accessibility. I mean, part of the problem is that, it may mention web accessibility standards, and it may require a company to have their website accessible, but if they don't define what that means,
no, I agree.
Have a checklist of things, then that just gets this gray area, and that's where you get the litigation. All right, you know what? We have babbled enough about accessibility. Why don't we bring our guest on?
Let's do it. Well, I'm glad you reached out to us. But before we get to the big announcement, why don't we talk a little bit about what Envision AI is? We had you back on the show in April, and I'm sure there's been some updates since then.
Oh, definitely. So for those who don't know, Envision is a tool that helps you read text, recognize faces, recognize objects, and so much more. Envision is basically a tool that's works on the smartphone, right? So we have iOS and an Android version out. To give you a quick idea of what the app is capable of. So for example, if you want to read short pieces of text, like you're at a train station and you want to read the display sign, you want to read handwritten text. So the app is capable of reading handwritten text, or even scanning documents, or reading PDFs. So in terms of reading, the app does it really, really well. We also have other features, like, for example, being able to scan for barcodes. We have a huge, extensive library of products, and you can scan for barcodes really easily. It describes scenes around you. And we also introduced a feature called Scan and Find, which allows you to go ahead and scan for objects in your surroundings. So if you have a laptop, or if you have a phone in your surroundings, you can actually scan for it, like a chair, an empty chair, for example. That's what users use it for right now. So you can scan for empty chairs and so on. And the app as a whole is packaged to work smoothly with voiceover, and also supports dynamic text. So if you have like large text and stuff like that, it also works well for folks who use low vision features of iOS or Android. So that's a short intro about the app itself. Coming to what we introduced new after we had a chat, we've been hard at work on localization. So currently the Envision app supports over 25 languages. The app has been translated to 25 languages, that is. And we've also introduced the Scan and Find feature, which basically allows you to scan for different objects in your surroundings. You can scan for people real time. We also have, for example, introduced a faster edge detection feature. So for example, the whole scanning of a document becomes really simple on both iOS and Android, because we have really updated our algorithm to make it work faster. So these are some of the improvements. And of course, the big sale, the announcement. Yeah,
before we get into that, though, it's interesting, you mentioned barcode reading, and I haven't looked at the Envision app since April, and I need to look at it again. But last night I pulled out one of the competitors' apps to scan a barcode on a bucket of ice cream we had, and barcode not recognized. So, do the barcode databases that you guys use include other countries' barcodes? Because I don't think they're similar between countries.
Definitely. So we do include, barcodes from across the world. All right. So people use it to recognize barcodes in Israel, in Japan, in India, in the US. So it works across multiple countries. So it's not just really restricted to one geographical region. And we're continuously adding new products from all of the countries that we support on a daily basis. So this database is sort of growing each day. So yeah.
Well, I'll definitely have to look at the app again and try figuring out if I'm eating my ice cream or my wife's ice cream.
Yeah, it's ice cream anyway, so yeah.
That's right. All right. Well, Karthik, again, thank you so much for reaching out to us to share with our audience the big promotion that you guys have going on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Envision is actually having a sale right now where we're offering 50% off on our monthly and annual subscription and a whopping 75% off on the lifetime subscription. So that's basically the big, and this sale is going to last all through August. So it's been happening from the 1st of August and it will continue to go all through August. And it's happening on both iOS and Android.
Yeah.
That's the big, that's
nice.
the big announcement.
Yeah, it's great. I've seen a couple other people posting about it on Twitter and Facebook and such. And, when you reached out to us, unfortunately, I was on holidays, so we couldn't get you on right away. But to any of our audience that's listening, jump on this right away because we've got till the end of the month.
I mean, we've heard you guys, that's what I would want to tell your audience. Like, we've heard you guys. We really think that, the summer sale is a way to get more people into the Envision community. Right. And it's a way for us to make things a little more inclusive. And it's a big moment for us as well.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
the response that we've been getting so far for the first 15 days is nothing short of phenomenal. So we've gotten an amazing response from the community. People who have installed the app ages ago and were not able to subscribe just came back and bought a lifetime subscription. So it's really nice to see the community grow that big in such a short period of time. It's amazing.
Well, one of the great things that you guys have going for you is, and I'm going to toss out some names here. The Seeing AI is only iOS. The new Lookout app from Google, I believe, is still only available in the US and on Pixel phones. So Envision AI is both iOS and Android. So
and we support on iOS, we support iOS 10 and above.
Right.
And on Android, we support Android 6 and above. So we are the epitome of inclusion.
That's right.
Yeah. But that's always been our thing. Like, we want to be available to as many people as possible from as many different backgrounds as possible, and not really restrict the app to either one country or one set of high-end devices. So that's really how we always do things at Envision.
Well, we definitely urge all of our audience, and myself included, to check out the app if you haven't already, and share your experiences with your friends and family, and post it on social media and let Envision know what your results are like. Yeah,
I mean, we'd love to hear back from the community. Like, since the day one, we've always tried to actively engage with our community, be it on Twitter or on other forums, because that really gives us a sense of direction, and it also gives us a really good idea of what's going right and what's not. And so anyone who installs the app, they can always reach out to us from either within the app itself. So we have a request a call option, or you can go ahead and send us feedback and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Or you can reach us out on Twitter, Facebook, anywhere we're there. We try to respond to people as soon as possible. So yeah.
And what is the website address where people can find out more information?
Right. So you can go to www.letsenvision.com. So that's the website address. That's where you can find more information. And if you just search for Envision AI on Google, most likely we're going to show up, and you can install the iOS or the Android version from there. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, that's really exciting news. And again, I urge everybody to at least download the app, install it, and check it out. And if you like it, you've got to the end of August to jump on this promotion.
Yeah, and we have some really exciting stuff planned for folks on both iOS and Android. So we've been getting a lot of feedback, with new text recognition features that people want, and so on. So we have a whole roadmap of really exciting stuff that no one else is doing out there. We have a whole bunch of exciting stuff coming out in the next few months.
Awesome. Well, Karthik, again, thank you so much for reaching out to us and sharing this information with our audience. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, guys. So I definitely get back in touch with you guys as and when new developments happen, and great going with the show. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks,
all right, Ryan. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good night.
Thanks, Rob.
Hey, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
Where can people find us?
They can find us online at atbanter.com.
They can also drop us a line if they so desire. Cowbell@atbanter.com.
They can also call us toll free at we don't have a phone number.
We don't have a phone number.
You're right. They can't call us.
Ring those phones.
They can also find us on Facebook and Twitter.
And Instagram.
Yes, sirree.
And and that's going to about do it for us this week. I'm hoping that next week we're going to be back to normal.
It looks like it. I think. I don't remember if Steve accepted the invite for next week's show.
Yeah, I miss Steve.
Steve who?
His voice.
You'll see him soon.
All right. Well, then that's where people can find us. And that means that has taken us to the end of yet another show. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. And we will most definitely see everybody next week.
Bye.
This podcast has been brought to you by Canadian Assistive Technology, providing low vision and blindness solutions across Canada. Find us online at www.canasstech.com. That's CANASSTECH.com, or call us toll free at 1-844-795-8324. For all your assistive technology servicing needs, call Chaos Technical Services at 778-847-6840, or find them online at chaostechnicalservices.com.
Whoa, look at that. Master of the one take.